Hi guys, welcome to the video. Hope you're doing well. Well, as you can see from the thumbnail, this is some new software for the foam cutter and firmware, which I've just released today, which you'll be able to find up on the website. So I'll put links in the description so you know where to get them. So back in July 2020, I released the grbl Hotwire Mega 5X Windows software to drive the foam cutter using the grbl Mega 5X 1.1 software developed by grbl, I think is. Hope I pronounced that right. I've got it wholly wrong. And all I did really, I modified a few settings to suit the foam cutter and just compiled that firmware, and that firmware has been working brilliantly for this last about 3 years now, 2.5, 3 years. So it's been working brilliantly, and some guys have created some awesome projects with them, and I'll put a few pictures up to show you just some of the the awesome things they've created. I mean, when guys contact me with questions and that, and I just say, if they wouldn't mind, just send some pictures, some builds, and there's a whole gallery on the website if you want to take a look at some of the different, and you don't have to build it the way I've built it. A lot of guys like to do it their own way, and there's been some awesome machines made as well, and there's been a lot made just the same. So, if you do want to build a foam cutter, I'll put links in the description, and there's a free ebook, and there's some plans as well for a modest charge just to cover the running costs of the website. And if you want to do that and build some awesome projects, then by all means carry on watching. So why this new software version? Well, the main reason being two reasons really: user feedback and future proofing. Now I've had feedback from users over the years that it's been running of some things they'd like to be able to do, and the two main areas have been able to adjust the current to the hot wire while the job's running, and also being able to adjust the feed rate while the job's running. Now previously you couldn't do that, and partly because I wasn't sure how you did it anyway, but I've now figured it out and got that working. So I'll show you some demos of that working, and it works really well now. So we've got that. And the other thing is for 32-bit boards. Now, as you may be aware, the grbl Mega 5X firmware is based on the Arduino Mega 2560, which is an 8-bit board. And you can still get them boards. But as you probably realise, things will be moving on, and they might become harder and harder to get. You might still be getting from China, but sometimes some of the boards you get there are not the best quality. I mean, I've had some good and bad experiences with them boards, so I'm not tarring them all with the same brush. But so what I've done is I've been keenly interested in the grblHAL development, and also Fluid NC, which is a similar type of thing, and I've got some developments in 2024 coming for that, so keep a lookout for that. So what I've been doing is working on getting the software working with the newer 32-bit boards, and the main one I've been testing it on is the Big Trig Tech SKR Pico, which is a fantastic little board. So that works really well. But the newer software, which I've just called grbl Hotwire, not put any numbers on it, still works with the older software, and that's where it's taken me some time to get it developed working. When we see it on the demo, you'll say, well, it doesn't look a lot different, but believe me, there's quite a lot changed under the hood. So that's why the new version. So what I'll do is I'll just quickly run over what we're going to cover in the video. So the first thing is the changes from the old software to the new software. What's different about it, and as I said, it doesn't look vastly different, but there are some things that are different. The main thing being is that we're now going to be using the different access letters. You probably know the software uses X, Y, Z and U. Well, the new software is going to be using X, Y, Z and A, and it's the firmware as well that is using them. Now the main reason for that being is being able to run the boards with different software as well. So you can run this with some other software. So what I'll do is I'll then demo the new features on the board, show you that working, showing mainly the override of the feed control and the current control, and I've got a couple of little bits of video to show you that working and how well that works. How to upgrade from the old software to the new software, and that's really easy. So once we've done that, we'll run a bench test. I mean, it's important to run a bench test to make sure your board's working correctly before you get it on the foam cutter. I mean, you might get the board, install the firmware, connect it up to the machine and think, oh, why is this not working? Doing the bench test eliminates any extra complexity by installing it on the board, so we'll do that quickly. What I'll do as well, where the setup is exactly the same on the old boards, on the Mega boards, where that setup is exactly the same, I won't duplicate it again. I'll just put you a link to previous software where I've showed you how to do that. Otherwise, it's going to make this video extremely long. Then what we'll do is show you how to do the current and steps per millimetre on the SKR Pico board. It's all done in software now, which makes it a hell of a lot easier. So rather than messing around with trim pots and little jumpers and that, so that's really good. And what I'll do then is I'll show you, or I'll link you to a video showing you how to check the axis directions and that, which is more or less the same, and setting up homing. Now the only difference with homing, there's a different setting for the Pico board, but what I'll do is I'll highlight that in the video. If you're going to use homing, you don't have to use homing on the foam cutter, it works just as well without it, but some guys like to have it on, and it is a little bit of a safety feature. You know, you can stop the, if you get the settings wrong, it can stop it driving it back into the end stops or off the end. So we'll cover that a bit. It is slightly different on the Pico. And then once we'll do that, I'll show you a little demonstration cut. I've got my usual aerofoil that I do, but I've got something else that you might find interesting at the end, which I thought was a bit of fun as well. So we'll show you that. Right, so guys, we'll have a look at the new software. Now the software is very easy to install. If you just go to the download section of the website, just download it and it should install fine. Now I have done some limited testing on Windows 11. It seems to install fine on that. I've just recently got a little one of these mini PCs with Windows 11, and it seems to run fine on that. It runs fine on Windows 10. I don't have any older machines, so I can't guarantee whether it will work well on the older machines. I think it probably will, but I don't have the machines anymore to test it. So once you install it, you'll get a new icon here called grbl Hotwire. So if you just double click on that, and once you install it, it'll open it up immediately anyway. So if we open up, and it opens up in full screen, and you'll see it doesn't look vastly different. But if you just have a look at a few areas where it's changed, and you can see that instead of the old name now, I've put the X wire path and the ZA wire path. Now the reason for that is I used to get guys contact me saying the cut looks nothing like what it's coming out at, and the reason for that is if you're doing the straight wing, the root and tip are exactly the same. You'll see the exact profile of the wing, but what you're looking at here is the path the wire's taken. Sometimes it has to take some strange paths to get the wing shape you want. So I've just changed that to wire path to make it a bit clearer. I removed the buffer settings here. That it didn't make a lot of sense to have them on there really, and it was just taking up extra processing power. So they were gone that were there. And the other thing you'll notice, the big change down here, is we've got override current settings and override feed rate settings. So that's the major change there. And on the settings page, we've changed a little bit there. You see it's slightly different at the bottom, but now what we've got, we used to have down here backup settings and refresh settings, What we've got now on the file menu, we've got export settings and restore settings. So when we do the upgrade from the older version, what we will do first, you load your old version up, export the settings, and then import the settings to this one, and it should work. That's only if you're using the Arduino boards. You can't export the settings from the Arduino board into the Pico board, because the settings are a lot different. But when you download the firmware, the settings are already pre-set in there, and I will have settings files for them as well, so you can use them as well. So what we'll do is first thing we'll do, go back onto the interface. It's found the COM port, COM15, and what we'll do is we'll connect. And there it looks much the same. Now if you have a look down here in this section here, you can see there's a lot more information. It tells you the driver version, and you can see it's RP2040, and some more information there. This has just come off the live machine running, so it's still set for homing. So let me just take the homing off at the moment. Change that back to 0. And again, guys, always remember to press enter after these settings, because if you don't, just coming out of the settings won't be enough to save it. You have to actually press enter for it to save. And then just as a confirmation, just do a refresh to make sure it's taken that setting. So if we go and have a look now, back to the interface, and we just do a disconnect and connect. So we've lost our homing cycle now, and if we just do a 0 now, all our settings have been zeroed out now. So main difference being now, when we run some G code, it will open up these. And you see at the moment they're greyed out. And the other thing you may notice as well, instead of having 2 buttons here, I've changed it to 1. So this will change when we've got some software in. So what I'll do is I'll just load up a demo file so you can see. So look at this one, I think. Yeah, there we go. So that's brought the software in. Now, if we start to run the software, so this is going to just be thinking it's connected to the machine, but it's not actually. So if we start running the software now, so we've got our wire where we want it on the machine. So what we can do now is we can turn the hot wire on, so the wire's on there, and you see now it's toggled to stay turn the hot wire off. And then if we actually run the software, you should see that these override settings come on. This side won't become available, and I'll explain to you why when we get running. Oh, we've got a pause in this one of 4 seconds. There we go. Now you can see now that the override settings have come into effect. So, and you should see this current move. So if we press, see we're increasing the current to the wire. And if you have a look at the slider there, you can see the slider moving. Now we've got 1% and 10%. It depends how much you're setting you've got there, because if you change it 1%, you sometimes won't see a change. So if we do 1% on 4.7, you know, it's about 0.04%, so it's not actually changing. So if we keep doing higher, you still can't change it there while it's running. You can only change it through these override settings. Now the reason that the override feed rate isn't enabled is because this G code is using what's called G93, which is the default mode for the dev foam software, and G93 sets the feed rate on a time basis. It's a little bit complicated to explain, but it works really well for foam cutting. So you wouldn't want to mess with the feed rate on that. But I will show you in another file which doesn't use G93 where we can change that. So that's working there, and you can see it's just working as normal. Everything else looks the same. We've got run there, settings there as usual. So So that's more or less the same. So let's, what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop this now. And I'm just going to do a reset, unlock, and then I'm just going to go rewind the software there, and then right, so they're at 0. So what I'm going to do is disconnect, unplug the board, and then we're going to plug the so we've got an MKS Gen L in there. So it doesn't matter whether it's the Gen 2 like this one, or the Mega like the Arduino Mega like this one. So this is the genuine Arduino Mega. So it works exactly the same for these boards. So what we'll do now, we'll come out the software altogether. We'll go into Mega 5X. Probably see a different port now. So we've got COM10 now. We'll do a connect. And what I didn't mention in the other one, you can see we've got the change of the access letters now. So we've got A and Z now. So X and A are the horizontal axis, and Y and Z are the vertical axis. So this has come up in, I think on the 8-bit software it does this. So all we have to do is unlock, and we'll just change the home in, because we're not connected to the machine at the moment. We'll just take that off. And then we'll disconnect, connect, unlock, and then we'll just zero out our settings. So there we are. You can see like there's a bit less information on the Mega board. So what we'll do is we'll load some G code up. Should we load exactly the same G code? There we go. Just the same one. Yeah. So we've got exactly the same G code in. We're all zeroed out. We'll turn the I think it wants about 20% on this one. Turn the Hotwire on, and then we'll start running the G code. And now we've got this pause in again. So off we go, and then we've got the same thing here. We can up the percentage. You can see now 1% is working because the figure's bigger. And then we can go down. And if you want to set it back to what it was, just do a reset, and it's back where it was. So that's running on the MKS. Which one have I got here? This is the Gen L version 1, but it works exactly the same for the version 2.1. The only difference is the slightly different firmware for the 2.1 because of if you're using homing, because the A limit switch is in a different place on the 2.1 to the 1.1, but both the firmwares are available, and it will run exactly the same as on the Mega. So we'll stop this one, and I'll find some stop, rewind, reset, unlock. There we go. Right, so what we'll do now is find some firmware that's got, and this one you might find a little bit entertaining. You'll see some of this later on as well. This was created with dev foam. So we should all be okay there now. Let's just set the Hotwire, turn the Hotwire on. Now if we set it going, we should see the override feed rate come in now. There we go. So you can now see we can adjust the override on the feed rate. So if we found that the the wire was dragging a little bit and it was going too fast. We could slow it down a little bit. And if you have a look at the bottom there, you can just see it says 200. If I minus 10%, see it's come down to 180, and we've got a feed rate that's gone down to 90% there. We can reset it, puts it back to where it was, and then we can do plus 10% now. So it's going to 110%. And you can see the feed rate's gone up to 240 in the bottom there. So so that's working well. And we've still got the wire control as well. So if we put that back to how it was, let's go back to 200. And then if we say we wanted it to cut a bit hotter, we can go plus 10%. And you can see the sliders moving up. Even though we can't move it ourselves, it is showing what it's doing. So that's the major change in the software. Let me just check if there's anything else. I don't think. Oh yeah, the other thing to show you as well is the export and input. So what we'll do is we'll stop this. So guys, in this next section we're going to show you how to install the new firmware and software, and this can be for an upgrade or a new install. So whether you're doing a new install or just upgrading from the older versions, this section will show you how to do it. So to start with, what I'm going to do is show you on the Arduino Mega 2560 base board. So we've got the ramps board there with the Arduino, and then we've got the two MKS boards. We've got a Gen L version 1 and version 2.1. There is a version 2 as well, and it works just the same. Now the only difference is the firmware is slightly different for the version 2.1 to do with if you're going to use homing. If you're not going to use homing, you can use the same firmware as the version 1 and the Arduinos. Now, as of the film of this video, just at this moment, the software and that isn't up on the website, but by the time I release this video, it will be. So I've got the software and the firmware downloaded onto my desktop, and what I've decided to do is make it one big download. Well, not that big, but everything in one bundle. Because in the past, what I've found is some guys have been a little bit confused as to what versions of firmware they should be using. So hopefully this will make it a little bit easier for you. So if you just download them, and I've got them here, I've got one for the firmware and one for the software. And so I'm going to show you how to do the Mega boards first, and then in the next section I'll cover how to do the 32-bit Big Tree SKR Pico board. Cracking little board this, I really like it. Right, so first thing we need to do before we do the upgrade is back up our settings. Now the settings will probably be retained on the EEPROM on the boards when we do the upgrade, but it's a good sort of belt and braces measure just to get these settings off. So if you're using an earlier version 5 prior to 5.13, then you're probably best off installing the later version so we can back up the settings. Right, so what we need to do first of all, we'll plug the board in. Now I've got version 5, the old firmware running on this board here. So what we'll do, we'll plug her in. And I've got the version 5 software here, 5.13. So all we'll do, we'll start that up. Just full screen it. It's already found the port. Now if you find the port's not visible, just do a rescan and it should come up. So it's found COM3. We'll do a connect. So there we are. We can see saying version 1.1, and there's some numbers there. When we update it, you'll see them change. So what we need to do is go to the settings page, and at the bottom there we've got a backup settings. So we just do backup settings, and then we save it. So you can see I've done this quite a few times. So what we'll do is we'll we'll just call this old settings. And then save that. And it says 38 settings saved. And then what we can do then, we can then come out the software. So that's all we need to do as far as that. Right. So before we can use the new software, we need to update the firmware on the board. Because we're using different access letters now, as I said previously, we're using X, Y, Z and A, or Z and A if you're in the US. So to do that's quite easy. I've got the firmware folder here on the desktop, so we'll just expand that. And we can see Xloader XYZA Mega 2560. So we'll copy that onto the desktop there. We'll just open that up. So if you have a look here, this is Xloader, which if you've done any of this before, you'll know it quite well. And we've got two firmwares in there. We've got firmware hex, and then we've got MKS Gen L version 2.1. Now that's specifically for the 2.1 board, and you'll see that on the actual board itself. The reason for that is because if you're going to use homing, the limit switches are in slightly different places for the fourth axis. So that's the only reason for that. Everything else is identical. And if you're not going to use homing, which a lot of guys don't, then the same firmware will work on them all. It's just the homing that's slightly different. Right, so what we'll do now is we'll load up, we'll just double click on Xloader. And what we want to do then is just go to the, to load the hex file. And let me find desktop, there we go. So the normal firmware is just firmware.hex. So we open firmware.hex, make sure we're on the right COM port, and also make sure you've got the right board selected. So we want the AT Mega 2560, and then the baud rate's 115200, and if all we do then is we do upload. If all goes well, we should just get a number of bytes uploaded. There we go. So that's looking fine now. So that's got the new firmware on. So now we've got the new firmware on, we can now install the new software. So the software here is in this folder here. And what I'm going to do is just going to extract it. Now this will coexist along with the old version as well. So you can see I've still got the old version there. I haven't had to uninstall it. So, and all we do is run the setup. Now I've run this on Windows 11 as well, guys. I'll put a little bit of video of it showing it running, and it runs absolutely fine. I was testing it last night just to double check. I've got one of these little mini PCs running Windows 11 Pro, and it worked absolutely fine, and the processor was the same. So we'll just do install. It's a very quick install. The only thing possibly you might find, and I've had one or two guys find this, they haven't got the right version of the .NET framework on. Now it should prompt you if you haven't got that on, but I know some guys, antivirus interferes with that. So just make sure you've got the right version. I think it wants version 4.7. So as long as you've got 4.7 on the .NET framework, it should work fine. But if it's opened up like that, everything's fine. So what we do now, do a rescan, COM3, it's the same port, and if we do a connect, so if we have a look down now, we can see the version 1.1L, and we've got XYZA. So that's installed the firmware onto the board, and we're now running the new software. So if we just have a look, we still have got all our settings there. So it hasn't got rid of the settings which it found on the board. But if it's a brand new board, you might you'll have the default settings that are in there, and everything you need to do you can do with the settings. I've had a few guys ask me how do they change the settings in the code, and you don't need to. I haven't had any occasions where guys have come to me and they've needed to modify the code. Well, maybe one very extreme case, he wanted something quite rare, but you know, in 99% of all cases, you don't need to compile the code. And in the early days, before Xloader was around, all the problems I got was guys trying to compile the code. You know, if you're not familiar with it, and it's understandable, you know, you could get all sorts of errors. So this is by far the simplest way to do it. So what we'll do now, we're on the new software, and on file there, we've got export settings, and you can see now we've got restore settings. So if we go to restore settings, and if we go to where we did the export from the previous version, grblHAL there. Which one is it? There we are, old settings there. Yeah, so that's the date one. So if we just select that, open, and it's restored 30 settings. So there we are, we've restored our settings now. So if we have a look through there, we should find everything's the same. And if we just load up a quick test file, and there we go, it's loaded out. And one of the things you can do as well to make sure your code's okay is to just run a check on it. So if we select the check button at the top, and then we just run the code, it won't actually send any commands to the stepper motor or anything. It will just run through the code and make sure there's no problems with it, which is quite handy sometimes. So if we just run through that, you can see it's running through the code there. And if there's any errors, you'll see them in the side then, it'll pop a message up. Generally, it's usually either you haven't got the access letter correct, or there's some code in there that it doesn't like. You know, maybe you've generated a code from some other G-code generation software, and it's not supported garble code. So that looks fine. So we'll just undo the check, do a rewind, and what we could do now, even though I've not connected to the foam cutter, it will still run on there as a test process. You may have noticed I've lost a couple of the heat sinks off of there. So what we'll do now is we'll just move it up 10. And forward 10. Zero everything out. There we go. So the machine's at 10, but we've now set the work coordinates to 0, and then that line there, if you just do a display reset, gets rid of that, and turn on the Hotwire. So let's give it about 20%ish. There we go. Turn on the Hotwire. And this bit of code's got a 4-second pause in it. That was just to allow the Hotwire to heat up a bit if you've only just switched it on. And there you can see it's working absolutely fine. So we've got the new access letters there. We can up or down the current to the Hotwire. So if you have a look there, you can see the slider move. And even though the slider's moving, we can't actually move it ourselves, because that would still have the same effect as before. It would interrupt the G-code and cause problems. So, and if you want it back to where it was, just press reset. So you've got control. The reason, I think I've said this before, the reason the feed rate isn't enabled is because this actual G-code is running G93. So with having that feed rate there, you wouldn't want to go into here and mess with it, because it's already been computed to give you the best cut. As you see later in the video, I do put some G94 code, which is just normal G code, and this becomes enabled then, and you can move that forward. So I've got some shots of that. So that's really how to do the upgrade or the install on the Arduino based boards. So as you can see, it works really well, although it does look a lot different at the front, apart from here and the hot wire. Believe me, there's a lot of work going on underneath. I've spent hours and hours on it to get it right. That's why it's been so long. I've had 1 or 2 guys asking for it, but I've had to do a lot of testing on it. And the thing is, you can test it on a board like this, it works perfectly, and then as soon as you put it on the machine, you find, you know, there are some issues. It's generally to do with homing and machine positions where I've had a few issues, but I think we've got that sorted now. So as the rest of the configuration goes, guys, for these mega boards, it's exactly the same as the old software, and I'll link you to the links on the website and the videos. So once you've got it installed like this and got it working, anything else to do with homing, calibration, axis direction is all exactly the same. So I'll link you to them videos rather than trying to make this video too long. So that's it installed on the Arduino Mega-based boards. What I'll do now is, if you're going to go for the 32-bit boards, we'll cover the 32-bit boards and show you how you do it on them. It's even easier. So I'll catch you in the next section, guys. So guys, in this section we're going to look at 32-bit boards using the grbl software. Now the grbl software has been quite an extensive rewrite of the original grbl into supporting 32-bit boards, and then there's a lot of boards that are supported. So if we just have a look on the grblHAL website, and I'll put a link in, and you can see there's a whole list of controllers on there, and we've got the big tree SKR Pico there. So that's the one we're using here on this board. But you can see there's quite a lot of boards supported now, and the list is getting longer every time I look. Now you will notice on the side it says Web Builder to build the firmware. Now I have tried the Web Builder and it does work fine, but there's 1 or 2 things that it doesn't put into the firmware for the foam cutting software. So what I've had to do is compile the firmware separately, and the firmware is on the website for you to use if you're going to use the Pico. That's a list of boards there, and I've only tested it on the Pico. I have done some limited testing on the MKS Tiny B, which has got the ESP32 processor, but I'm going to do something a little bit different with that in 2024. You can see we've got the little wire on there, which might give you a clue. So although I have had it working on there, I haven't done any live testing with it, where the Pico board here, you can see I've got it in this case here, and the reason I've got them connectors on there, because if you've seen them on previous videos, I've also got the hot build foam cut CNC, which is a fantastic foam cutter controller. That's 32-bit as well, using the Arduino Duo board. That works brilliantly, and this was really so I could just swap out between the, so this has got these type of connectors on the back, so I purchased some and put these on here, so it makes it easy for me to swap things in and out when I'm testing things. So why would we want to use a 32-bit board foam cutting? Well, as you probably see on the introduction, it's mainly future-proofing. These boards here, eventually they might disappear. I know some guys are struggling to get some of these in certain countries as well. So the 32-bit boards are probably the way to go for the future. Now the one I've chosen here is the big tree SKR Pico, and this is a real good board. I'm really impressed with it. It runs the Raspberry Pi RP2040 processor, and that processor is the same processor that's used on this little board here. And this is actually what I did a lot of the development on, just to make sure everything was working okay. And believe it or not, this little board here has got Wi-Fi on as well. But the SKR Pico hasn't. It will work on 24 volts. So for the Hotwire, the high voltage is better. 12 volts works fine on the ramps board, up to a certain limit on the wire. Once you get more than about a metre or 39 inches, then it does start to struggle. So you need to go to 24 volts then. The MKS boards support 24 volts, so that's, if you are going to stick to the 8 bits, then I'd recommend the MKS boards. So the Pico does support 12 and 24. It's got, under that little heatsink there, it's got the TMC 2209 drivers. And so with the Pico, the microstepping and the current are all set in software. Now on the older boards, we had to do that by going in and changing the jumper settings there for the microstepping. So those we'd have to put different jumpers on there for the microstepping, and to set the current for the stepper motor, we'd have to go in and alter the VREF by getting a voltmeter on them. And I've got videos on the website showing you how to do that, and it's not difficult, and it's quite easy to do, but it's just so much easier now in the software to change it all. The other advantage as well, this processor, this RP2040, is a really fast processor, so it will lead it to sort of future developments as well. So I've been really impressed with it, and the difference it makes in the noise on the foam cutter is amazing. During my initial testing, I thought, oh, something not working right here, and it was one of the vertical axis, and it was working, but it was moving that slowly and that quietly. I couldn't detect it, and after about 10 minutes, I realised there was nothing wrong. It was just quiet. So the first thing we need to do, if you're going to go down the 32-bit route with the Pico, is we need to get the firmware on, and that's really easy to do. So on the website, you can download the firmware, and as I said previously, I'm going to put all the firmwares in one big download, but I've just got them here on the desktop at the moment. So we've got the firmware there. It's just called grblHAL.uf2. So what we'll do, we'll just extract that. I'll extract it, and I'll just put it into, I'm just going to put it into downloads at the moment. Just put it into there. So that's gone into there. Now, the way we set this up, on the Pico board, there's two jumpers. We've got, I'll get you close enough to see this. We've got a jumper there. Now that jumper there is for where it's getting its power from. So is it getting its power to the board from the USB or the external power source? And then this jumper here is the one we use to load the firmware. So what we want to do to start with, now because I've got it taking its power from USB, it's in the USB section at the moment. We'll just check, yeah. So if you didn't want it to be powered by USB, you would just take that jumper off, but we'll put it back on. And then to get it to load up the drive, as you'll see, what we need to do is we need to move that jumper so it's bridging the connections there. So what will happen now is when we plug in, on the computer here you'll see another drive come up. There we go. And that's come straight up. And all we have to do is copy the firmware onto there. Now before you do that, thing to do is just take that jumper off, because what will happen is when it will reboot once the firmware goes on, and it will bring it back up into that mode again. So I've just taken that off there, so you can see it's not bridging the connectors. And all we do is we go into the download section. Let me find my downloads. Where did it go? ABCDFG. There we are. grblHAL UF2. So all we do is copy that. You could just drag it if you want. And then all we do now is paste it here. And that's it, done. Firmware's installed. You know, what could be easier than that? And all we need to do now, if you haven't already installed the Hotwire, grblHAL Hotwire software, just open it up. So we're on COM15. If we connect, there we go, we've got it working. So if you look down through the settings here, you can see it says RP2040, and there's a lot more options. Now there are a lot more settings for the grblHAL, but what I've done to keep things simple, I've only exposed the ones that you really need for foam cutting. Now there are a lot more settings, and I'll show you how you can access them if you want to, but I would advise you not to play about with them. It works quite well like this. So as you can see there, we've got these extra settings, $140 to $143, and then $150 to $153. Now that's how we set our current microstepping. So you can see I've got it set for 16th microstepping, and the reason for that is because the processor is a lot faster. It doesn't put as much slow. If you have 16th stepping running on the 8-bit boards, I mean, they will do it, but it just makes them work a little bit harder. But what I've got here, I've set it to 16th microstepping, and you notice on the current there, my motors that I use on the foam cutter are 0.9 of an amp, and this is in milliamps. The default setting I've put in the firmware is a half an amp or 500 milliamps, and my foam cutter works absolutely fine on, you know, on that, because the foam cutter's not doing really hard work on like a router pushing a bit through some, you know, hard material. It's just going through foam, and if you've got your wire adjusted correctly, there's very little load on it at all. So I've been running it at 500 milliamps and it works absolutely fine. So if we just load up some software, so if we just load up some G code, where are we? Let's put in this, let's try that one, Clark test. There we go. We can do the same again. We can do a check, and we can do run, and that's running through the software just fine. There we go, no problems with that software. Undo the check, do a rewind, and then if we go into the settings here, now one thing that you need to do, guys, is to make sure on the current settings, make sure you have got a value there. What I found during my initial testing, if for some reason you've got no value in there or 0, it tends to send all the maximum current to the stepper motors, and they do get very hot. So do make sure you've got a setting in there, and that's why I've set it at 500. So if you've got stepper motors that are working at say 1.7 milliamps there, then I would perhaps just try put them at at 1,000 and see what they work like. And if you hear any missteps, you'll definitely hear that on the stepper motor. It misses steps. You know, it's unmissable. But usually about 20% less than the maximum. It works fine for most things. And then you've got your microstepping there. Now once you've got all this set up, what we need to do then is go in and do the checking the axis directions, setting up homing if you want to use homing, and checking the calibration. Now all that is exactly the same as on the previous software, so I'll link you to that. The only difference on the Pico, if we're going to use homing, because it's got a load more settings, we've got $22. At the moment it's set at 0. Normally we would just set that to 1 to get homing working, but on the Pico, because it's got a lot more options, instead of setting it to 1, we set it to 9. So I'll put that in the notes on the website as well. So if you're going to use homing, make sure you set that to $9. But then everything else is exactly the same as the older software. So that's why I wanted to do it like this, so there wasn't loads of different versions of software to support. So we can change axis direction, we can invert the homing direction, and you can check the limit switches here. Because we're not actually connected, it's showing them all open at the moment, which, because there's no limit switches connected, it will be open. This little button here, D10 relay, what that's for is if you want to switch the Hotwire on and then have it control like an extractor fan, which is a good idea. I had one guy from France ask me about that, and so what happens now, if you select the D10, what will happen is it will enable one of the other, it will enable the D, which is one of the, I think it's the next one along, I think, D10 on the board there. And what you can do is you can then wire that into some sort of relay, and I think he was wiring into a solid state relay, and he got a big extractor fan over his foam cutter, like a kitchen extractor fan, and that was pulling the fumes away. So that's a real good idea as well. Yeah, because some of this foam is you have got to be careful, use it in well ventilated areas. And the foam cutter now, if you've seen in my previous videos, was sat just across there. I've now moved it now out to my shed come workshop outside, so I've got some plans for that next year as well. So that's the SKR Pico. This software should work fine with any of the grbl supported controllers. So if you can get the firmware compiled okay, then you should be able to run it fine. Now, I haven't included compiling the firmware because, to be honest guys, it's quite involved, and it did take me some time to get the firmware compiled and tested. And originally I was going to try and just use the web builder, but I may revisit it in the future as well to see if we can use that. It was turning on a different port for the Hotwire, and that's why it didn't really work. So I may revisit that in the future, see if there's anything we can do about that. So that's 32-bit boards, guys. Right, set the job going. Not wire power too much, so we'll start adjusting it. So we're going down to 23% now. So it wasn't a bad cut, even though we were adjusting the temperature going through. So we'll try doing the feed next. Right, so this time we've got a file in that doesn't have G93 in it. I'll put a picture up of the file and show you. So what we're going to do, I'm going to set the hot wire quite hot, about 30%. Turn on the hot wire. Check it's working. Yep. And then when we run it now, we should see that the feed rate becomes enabled as well as the hot wire. So if we run the code, and as you can see now, we've got the feed rate overriding the current override. So let's slow the feed rate down. Go. So you can see in the display. And you can hear it's changing. You can see that the wire's going slower. And then if we reset it, it goes back to what it was. Not a bad one. So that's doing different feed rates. Right, here we go. See if this works. Load the file in. Machine's all zeroed out. Turn the hot wire on.